At the heart of us, our social orientation is what drives our lives. And this is not necessarily rational. In fact, we live mostly in a myth of rationality. Now, many of you study the social sciences know that this is what science has been discovering, especially over the last 20 years, that very few of the things we do are rational. It goes back probably 2,500 years ago to Plato. Plato, in the Phaedrus dialogues, talked about how the rational mind was a charioteer who held the raging emotions in place. Some of us probably remember that from Philosophy 101. So for 2,500 years, we've worshipped at the altar of the rational in our culture. In an interesting way, it's our search for belonging that's tearing our culture apart. And I know that's an interesting thing to say. It sounds like a dichotomy, and it is to a certain degree, but I want to explain what I mean. You see, we've thought for 70 years in modern psychology, since Maslow, we've thought that physiology is our primary human need. You know, Maslow invented that model in 1943, and that's been one of the basis of human psychology. In fact, it turns out that Maslow was wrong, that belongingness is actually our key human need. And it makes sense if you think about it. The most vulnerable time of a human being's existence is infancy. We can't survive as infants for the first few years of our lives unless we belong. The first imprint we have as human beings is, I exist because you exist. And if you think about it, everybody here has experienced a moment where belonging was more important in a very basic sense than physiology. How many of us, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, how many of us have been in a meeting where you needed to go to the bathroom and you sat there and squirmed for 20 minutes rather than just go out to the bathroom and be the first one to leave the meeting? But think about that. It's a silly, stupid thing, but it's a perfect example of how belonging is more important than our physiological needs. You know, we're drawn to fit in, and in fact we know now that being excluded from a group triggers activity in the same regions of the brain, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, that's associated with physical pain. In fact, there are some researchers in the UK right now who are treating social pain, social exclusion pain, with aspirin and finding that it eases people's suffering. This is fascinating stuff. So the relationship between our cognitive and social functions is like a seesaw. The more our cognitive brain takes over, which is basically located in the outer, newer surfaces of the brain, the more the cognitive part takes over, the less our social interest. The more our social interest takes over, the less rational we are cognitively. And this is what we're, of course, seeing in many different ways. The first question is, very important, what is something you admire about the other person? Now, why is this important? This goes back to Dale Carnegie. Because our natural tendency is to feel threatened. If we start with some acknowledgement, and there's always something. If we start with some acknowledgement of the other person's being, of their humanity, their defenses come down. They're more likely to listen. They're less likely to be reactive. It moves us out of that limbic reaction into the prefrontal cortex so we can be more thoughtful about what we're doing. So one of the challenges is that a lot of the work we've done, even in my industry around diversity and inclusion, for all of the best intentions, to teach people about what it was like to be the other. You know, you'll never understand because you're not a man. You'll never understand because you're not a woman. You'll never understand because you're not black, Latino, whatever. You know, the challenge with that, even though it's very well intentioned, is that it actually causes people to diminish their empathy because it reinforces the differences. This is why race amity is so important. When we reinforce where we're similar, when we can begin to tap into where we're similar, we have a tendency to want to move towards each other. You are now potentially a member of my tribe. When you reinforce to me that I'll never understand, you've convinced me now that I'm not a member of your tribe, so my trust goes down and my empathy goes down. So we have to really revisit some of the ways we're doing diversity and inclusion work if we expect to move that way. So what's something you admire about the person? Number two question, what are some of the life experiences that you think have led you to believe the way you do? So it's an invitation to see where those feelings came from, where those thoughts came from, so we can really understand why people feel that way, not just what they feel. The third is the most important perhaps of all, and that is, what about this situation scares you or concerns you? Fear is ultimately our core motivating feeling. And if you can get people to talk about their fear, then you can get to the heart of the matter with them.